The foundation of anything is often the most crucial piece to get right. It affects everything else that's built on top of it. And in your D&D campaigns, Session 0 is your foundation. So today we're going to walk through a simple Session 0 checklist to make sure the foundation that you've laid is correct. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the show designed to help you become the world's greatest dungeon master without having to sacrifice extra time, extra money, or your relationships. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and I've been putting out episodes here about dungeon mastering for over 3 years, having talked with critically acclaimed authors, D&D influencers, voice actors, improv specialists, and some real-world experts. And today, we're going to leverage all of that to help you simplify your Session 0 planning. Let me first say sorry that we are getting this episode out a little bit late today. As we get to the end of 2024, we are a little bit more disorganized than we ought to be, and frankly, going into 2025, we're going to fix that. Also, you'll have to bear with me. I am feeling slightly under the weather, so again, apologize for that. And then lastly, I am on daddy duty, so if you see my child in the background, just smile and know that it is the wonders of childhood that allow us to play D&D in the first place. It's the creativity, the willingness to play pretend, and all that. So just smile and enjoy it. But first, before I get to the meat of the show, let's actually explain what a Session 0 is for those of you who don't know. This will also allow me to give you my definition so that you and I can both be on the same page. And I'm not going to go too in-depth into it because I'll likely do a podcast episode about it later, and I am actually writing a blog post about it too, so if you want more info, you can check those out later when they are released. But for me, Session 0 comprises all of the planning, collaboration, rule setting, and culture cultivating that happens between the moment where a player agrees to play in the D&D campaign and the start of your second session. I consider this my Session 0 simply because not everyone has the luxury of actually getting together to hash out all these important details. And frankly, Session 1, for me, can still somewhat be considered something of a Session 0 in my experience. And that's not to say that you can't have a formal Session 0 where everyone shows up, does the traditional things. You can. I just expand my definition to encompass a little bit more because I find that to be more convenient for me. So, with that out of the way, let's get down to brass tacks. This is my Session 0 checklist. This is what I try to make sure happens every Session 0. Number 1, get the first session scheduled. I think the most important thing you can do during Session 0 is make sure that the first session is scheduled, and that everyone is aware of that fact and they have it in their calendars. If it's not in their calendars, it doesn't exist. I know a lot of you out there will likely be thinking that using calendars is stupid, but take it from me, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. I also think it's important to schedule the first session because it sets a precedent that every session is going to include time to schedule the next session. And I actually take this concept from Alex Hormozi. If you guys know him, he's really awesome. And if you've heard me talk for any amount of time, you know that I really love his ideas and kind of his whole mentality. And one thing that really resonates with me as a dungeon master is called BAMFAM. BAMFAM is an acronym from Alex Hormozi that stands for Book a Meeting from a Meeting. And I guess for DMs, it should be BASFAS. So book a session from a session, which doesn't sound as nice as BAMFAM. So let's stick with BAMFAM and not make Alex angry. The idea here is that you never have a time where you don't have a session on the calendar. There's no gaps unless you decide to have a gap, and in which case, right? There's no ambiguity. Number 2, set expectations. The second most important thing you need to do in your Session 0 is to set expectations. And for me, there are 2 parts to this: your expectations and your players' expectations. Before you even talk to players about what they want, you need to clarify what you want as a DM. And I'd also recommend spending some time getting to know yourself and your strengths because you're naturally going to lean into those. For example, I've found recently that I tend to lean into puzzles and role-playing a little bit more than I lean into combat. And I think this is because I'm not as skilled in managing well-thought-out combat. And once you know this information about yourself, you can make decisions. Are you going to lean into it or try to do the opposite? In my case, will I do less combat and more puzzles and roleplay, or will I try to revert my natural tendencies? This is important because you get to tell your players, this is the type of game that I'm most likely going to run. Are you okay with that? Then they get to either decide whether to play with you or not, or they get to make requests of you. And from there, you get to start a dialogue. They can ask that more combat is added or that the puzzles have combative elements or other such requests, and then you get to make decisions. That's how negotiations work. The other negotiations you'll need to set are your veils and lines, yours. And if you don't know what that is, listen to episode 181 of our show and hear Jay Foster talk about veils and lines. Essentially, they are things that you don't cross. For example, me personally, I'm really only going to run games at around a PG-13 level. That's kind of just because that's who I am naturally, right? The language of players, if they want to go rated R language, I'm fine with that. I can deal with that. But anything intensely sexual, I'm probably going to skip over or imply rather than spend too much time on it. And again, that's just because that's who I am. And this is an opportunity for you to set up the type of game that you want to play. And then your players get to choose whether they want to play that game or not. Lastly, you should come up with expectations that you'll have for players and not the characters. Are you going to allow phones at the table? Are you going to expect people to communicate properly and promptly and efficiently? What are your expectations for rules and such for the players' responsibilities of the campaign? I guess 2B, if your expectations was 2A, 2B is the party's expectations and wants. This isn't a one-sided party, and as such, you need to discover what your party wants. In my experience, most players are just along for the ride, so they won't likely have a lot of expectations. They're just going to be happy with whatever. Or at least they won't tell you those expectations, because they may feel like it's rude or anything like that, but deep down, they likely will have some expectations, even ones that they may not be aware of, because they likely have preconceived notions of what D&D is, what it's all about, and how the game functions. They may have watched some actual play shows like Critical Role, High Rollers, or even our show, The Pact and Boon. Or they may not have. Maybe they'll be expecting to have an experience like the Dungeons & Dragons movie. No matter what, they'll be thinking about having a particular experience, and it's your job to find out what kind of experience they may be anticipating or expecting. Beyond that, you need to find out what sort of experience they would actually enjoy. Ask questions about what sort of things they like. Probe into the shows they watch, the games they play, and the books they read. And as a DM, you want to give them an experience that they will enjoy. So, to make that easier on yourself, get a bearing for what they already enjoy. It's likely your party members may or may not be forthcoming with their answers. Heck, they may not even understand themselves that much. At least you've opened the door for these types of discussions. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too. Do you want to play Dungeons & Dragons with me? Well, you know you can. we offer professional dungeon master services. That's right. All of our podcast hosts are professional game masters that you can hire for your private or corporate Dungeons & Dragons game. We can do one-shots or long-term campaigns. And if you want to schedule your first session with us, go to session0studios.com/dungeon-master-4-hire and get started and hire us today. Wouldn't it be nice to gamify your Dungeon Master abilities? In D&D, characters can reach level 20, so why can't Dungeon Masters? We're happy to tell you that now you can. We created the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for you. It's a simple tool to gamify your progression to higher and higher levels of Dungeon Mastery. It includes Dungeon Master levels 1 to 20 with associated XP requirements, as well as a long list of Dungeon Master activities that will give you XP to get you to level 20. Each activity has a challenge rating and an XP amount. In order to level up, all you need to do is find out how much XP you currently have, find out how much you need, and then pick activities to get you there. You can get the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for free by going to session0studios.com/newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter once you get there, and we'll email you the Level Up Guide in the first email. Finally, leveling up as a DM can be as fun as leveling up a character. Along with understanding what the party wants, ask them questions about what they expect from you. Most people will simply answer, just Dungeon Master for us. Occasionally, though, you'll get answers that are a little bit more involved. And you should even ask if there are particular themes that party members want to explore and play out themselves. Number 3, table rules. Next up on the list is table rules. And this is essentially the next evolution from your expectations. You are formalizing rules for the table and how those rules will be handled if they're broken. For example, what if someone at the table starts watching videos on their phone during the game? As a DM, for me, that's a signal to get them involved in some other way, but should your table have specific rules for what happens when someone does that? They say that a contract is important for when a relationship goes south. And the best contracts describe what to do when there is conflict. I think a session 0 is exactly the same. You need to think about the different scenarios that might come up and how you're going to handle them. How would you handle player disagreements or a player being a bully? How do you handle a player becoming uninvolved over time? When you stipulate and create rules as a table, your entire gaming experience will be much better because there won't be ambiguity when a conflict does arise, because it's not a matter of if, but when. Number 4, the premise of the story. After you get expectations, scheduling, and rules out of the way, you get to start into the fun stuff of Session 0, the story. Session 0 is really where your players get to taste the story for the first time. For the most part, you'll indicate the starting scenario and possible reasons why an individual character might be in any given location where Session 0 is going to take place or Session 1 is going to start. And it allows players to somewhat prepare by thinking about where they will start in the game. It also allows you as the DM to get the backstory of the characters. Remember, this is a game, but it's also a story, and it's a story the entire table tells together. The PC's backstories matter a lot. And in this stage, you get the backstories and begin to weave them into the main plot as well as weave them together. With the backstories in hand, you can tweak the starting scenario to incorporate the character's motivations and interests much better. Number 5, character creation. Now, you can help your players make their characters. For a lot of groups, this simply means you give the party a list of do's and don'ts. For example, don't make any character with a flying ability. Don't make a changeling. Do give me a general idea of the ultimate version of your character. Do decide on a compelling reason your character doesn't spend most of their time at home knitting. Do give your character some sort of relationship to the gods, etc. These are just some examples, but during character creation, you get to help your players make cool characters, and more importantly, make characters that they will have fun playing. Don't worry too much about stats. but instead worry a lot about character motivations and goals, as well as their history. The more fleshed out the personality and psychographics of a character, the better it will be to entice the player to roleplay with them. For your character creation, I would also highly recommend using character briefs, and we'll likely do an episode about that coming up in the future. Number 6, playtesting. Now we come to some of the even more fun parts of doing a session 0, playtesting. And I define session 0 as the time between a player agreeing to play and the start of session 2, because for a lot of parties, they do all of the normal session 0 stuff, but forget to do any of the play testing. So their session 1 is really sort of just still part of session 0 because none of the players have ever played their characters before. It's important to give the players a chance to play test their characters to see if they want to stick with that character. Obviously, players can really change characters whenever they want, but the longer they play with the character, the harder it gets, simply because of the emotional attachment. Sometimes in session 0, give the party a chance to test out combat as well as a few other skills, like social interactions or skill checks, and really find ways to let the party try out all the things that they would want to do as their character. A lot of people just default to having this be their first session, but it's not a bad idea to even just test drive some stuff beforehand. Number 7, party connections. During session 0, it might be a good idea to start discussing some connections within the party. I've talked about using galvanizing experiences, but this is where you can also break off between a couple of players here and there and build the connections between their characters. High Rollers in the UK did this in the second campaign, as did Critical Role in their second campaign. This is a good point to do because it can also allow you to give a small look into the starting scenario so that party members can think up reasons why their characters would be there and why they'd want to do certain things. If you don't have any inter-party connections in mind, then this is a great time to start planning the galvanizing event. I'll do a future podcast episode on this as well, but simply put, a galvanizing event is an event or circumstance that bonds the party together in some way. It aligns their motivations for some period of time, getting them moving in the same direction so that way they can form into a party. The reason why this is important is because the party needs to stick together for enough time until natural friendships emerge. And for the sake of the story, you can't rely on the real-life friendships between the players because the characters might not know each other or care about each other. The last thing we want is for the party to devolve into infighting because there's no reason that they would hang out, right? We don't want them to split up that fast. So take time to get to know the motivations of the characters so that way you can create some reason for them to stick together, at least long enough until they decide that they want to stick together. Next, you'll find out what connects each party member to the problem. The problem is a simple way to describe the plot or the conflict. So if the problem is a wizard who is stealing the minds of little children, then you need to think about how each character is connected to the problem and what their relationship to the problem is. If most characters have some sort of relationship, pro or against the problem, but one character just doesn't care, that gets really boring for that character really fast. Number 8, tools. Now is a great time to make sure that everyone has the proper tools to enjoy the game to the fullest. And this looks different for in-person games versus online games. For in-person gaming, the main tool everyone needs is their character sheet. As the DM, it's your responsibility to ensure that players can access their character sheet. Even if that means that you have to poke and prod them to download an app or print off a piece of paper, you still need to push them to access it. And after they get it initially, then it's on them. Next, they will need access to some sort of dice, and whether it's an online version or a physical version, and where it comes from, that's up to you. The last tool for in-person games is really sort of an optional discussion piece, but it might be worthwhile to check and make sure that everyone has transportation to get to the sessions reliably. If someone doesn't have reliable transportation, that's an excellent opportunity for the group to offer carpools or something like that. And I know it's not a fun conversation, but it is necessary. Now, for virtual gaming, the same rules apply here for the character sheet and the dice. You, as the DM, make sure that the player can access their character's sheet. The major difference with virtual gaming is making sure everyone can communicate with each other. Virtual gaming takes a couple different forms. There is the PBP, which means play by post. That's just a text-based version of the game where you can play via chat in some sort of platform. Next, you have audio-only games. These require, obviously, only an audio connection and rely mostly on theater of the mind. Lastly, there is video conferencing games. These require people to be able to see the screen and often see maps and the faces of their party. And Session Zero is a great time and place to stress test your audio-visual connections, making sure everyone can reliably connect and they all know how. Within all these options, you have different choices as to add-ons you might want to explore. These include ambient and music, battle maps, minis, or player tokens. This is a great time for you, the DM, to make sure you know how to use all these tools at your disposal. It's a simple hobby. It's fine to make mistakes and adapt during your games, but it's always better experiences to do it right the first time. Let me just finish up by saying that Session Zeros do not have to be complicated. I provided a checklist here to help you make sure you get all these things, but if you miss something, that's okay. You can go back and just do what you missed. It's never too late. I'd also reiterate why we do Session Zeros. Let's paint a picture. Close your eyes and imagine the following scenario. You're sitting at a table at your house or at a friend's house. The room is warm and you can smell pizza sitting on the kitchen counter. You're DMing for a group of friends and currently the entire party is engaged in an amazing portion of inter-party role-playing. And it's been going on for about 30 minutes. It's interesting and everyone seems incredibly engaged. You wait for the perfect moment to interrupt and you explain that as the party is discussing, something happens. And the players are all hanging on your words. When you finally say, that's where we'll end tonight's session, the entire group lets out various sounds of dismay and disappointment. They want to keep playing. They all make sure to schedule the next session and they leave smiling. That scenario right there, that's why we do Session Zeros. We do it so that as many sessions as possible can be the greatest session we've ever done. It's because we want to have that feeling that you can probably imagine of having provided an amazing gaming experience and having told a gripping story. That is why we do it. So make sure to evaluate your own Session Zeros and make sure you do the best you can in preparing yourself and your players for your games. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope it helps you, and I'd love to hear any successes you have or to talk with you about any struggles you experience. We'll be back next time with another handcrafted episode just for you, but until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.